said in the interview. If multiple informants talk about the event in the same way, if you ask the informant to review your draft report and then take into account that maybe some things you've misunderstood, maybe experts can review the draft reports. So these are all ways to make sure that, okay, we wanted to measure this and that. What can we do to make sure that the measurement is as correct, as valid as possible? Now, internal validity is all about, I have all this data and I need to come to valid conclusions. So this is this data reduction stream that Anna was talking about. So it's really about the pattern matching, the explanation building. Is it convincing? Is it indeed aggregating the right type of first order codes into second order codes? If all of that is a strong building, it's a convincing story, then the internal validity will be higher. External validity is very much about how did I select the case studies? What kind of logic did I use to sample my case studies? If that's a strong logic, then it's also more convincing that what I found in my studied set of cases will also apply to other cases. If I show the richness of my data, then that will also be more convincing to say, okay, given that it works in these richly described cases, we are also convinced that it will be true in other cases. And of course, you need to report details on your cases because that will help readers to, for themselves, also decide, is this generalizable to my firm or is it generalizable to companies in another country? And finally, reliability is very much about being very transparent about what you did and of course being consistent in how you execute your plan. Because then someone else, by taking your methods chapter, they can say, okay, we're going to do exactly the same things. We're going to follow the exact same protocol. We're going to interview people in the same way. And if that is possible, if you create that possibility, then the reliability of your findings is also higher. So you see that on the right-hand side, there's also different stages at which you can work on high validity and high reliability. It's already in the data collection, but it's also in the data analysis, and it's also in the reporting of your findings that you build this strong fundament of construct validity, internal validity, external validity, and reliability. And we very carefully selected these 4 articles as examples. So that's just to make sure that what we talk about in theory also becomes real for you. So let's link it to the articles that are about qualitative research. So first of all, we have Salviaridis and Van der Valk with their multiple case study. They very closely stick to the traditional set. So this is a literal table from their paper where they argue why they think they have high internal validity, high construct validity, high external validity, and high reliability. So they take the traditional set and they explain in their paper what they did, measures, what did we do to try to meet these criteria in the best way. So it's a classic approach to reporting methodological quality. Now the other paper with qualitative methods, the Abushaika et al., they don't use this traditional set, but they still argue in different parts of the paper why they think they've done a good job. So it's a bit more hidden, and they use sources like Strauss and Corbin and Lincoln and Guba. Those are really classics in the area of qualitative research, but most of their work is in textbooks, not in articles, so it's a bit more difficult to lay your hands on. But they have translated more or less the classical set into what they think is more appropriate for qualitative research. But you could still hopefully recognize that when they talk about credibility, transferability, dependability, confirmability, integrity, in the end, they're talking about quality dimensions that are very strongly related to what we just discussed. if you have a look at what we see here, which one would you say very clearly links to external validity? Do you see one of these items here, and you can focus on the first 5, that you say clearly links to this idea of external validity? Which one would you choose? And I need to look at the chat. Yes, I see quite some answers. Transferability, actually, it's the only one that you say. And that's indeed the one that I would also choose. It says here, the extent to which findings from one study in one context apply to other contexts. Very clearly an external validity example. Now, if I read this one, extent to which results appear to be an acceptable representation of these data, you could say, okay, this links to construct validity. I would, even if some of you would say internal validity, I would also say, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. And this is really about, okay, we have data and we have results, and there should be a good link between the two. So it's either a matter of good measurement, or if you take results as something more in terms of conclusions, it's more like an internal validity aspect. So they shine through the 3 types of validity and reliability, but they are not literally here. It's another way of talking about quality. Now, for reliability, I think this one, extent to which findings are unique to time and place and explanations are stable and consistent. If they are stable and consistent, it would mean that the next researcher would also have the same type of findings, even if done a year later. I see very strong links to reliability for this one. Is this clear, or is there something in the chat I should
Actually,
answer?
it's interesting that you mentioned this, because one of the students, Yari, said that, yeah, that actually also looks quite as external validity. Yes, because I think indeed, like what you're discussing now is reliability more in quantitative research, if you think about, can I do the same? But I think it also links to qualitative, because it's really about, if you document and explain very thoroughly what you did, then it's reliability. But I think, yeah, it definitely also relates to external validity. But yeah, we classified it as reliability when we were looking at this.
Yeah, so the most important thing that I would like you to take out of this is that in assignment 2, we expect you to say something about threats to validity. So, and then we mean the construct, internal, external, and reliability all together. So threats to validity refers to all 4 of them. So what do you think upfront might be threats to validity, and how can I minimize those risks? Plus, all the way at the end of the bachelor project, we want you to reflect on them. So you've gone through your whole study, and then you reflect on the different types of validity and ask yourself, okay, what kind of limitations does my study have because we executed it in this way? And because sometimes only afterwards you can see that there probably was some social desirability bias. That people were answering questions trying to give you the socially desirable answer instead of the true answer. And it's difficult to know all of this upfront, so you also need that reflection in the end. Okay, let's go to the final part. So let's talk about how you can present your study, but also the results of your study. And why is that thing in the middle between brackets? Because there are, in the bachelor project, 2 steps in your reporting when we talk about the study as such. That is, in assignment 2, you are presenting what you plan to do. So we want to collect data via interviews. We plan to interview, like it says here, we will sample 12 experts on artificial intelligence for our interviews. So you are writing in the future tense about what you plan to do. And that should be a convincing story. But then assignment in assignment 4, you report on what you actually have done. So you rewrite your text of assignment 2, integrate it in that larger report, and then you present what you did. So it might be slightly different from what you plan to do, and you will also write that in the past tense. So it's no longer what you plan to do, but what you did. And if you manage to indeed interview 12 of these experts, you could write that down. We interviewed 12 AI experts, but you might add some more detailed information that they are from 8 different organizations. Or maybe in the end, you managed to interview only 10, but you also interviewed 2 other types of interviewees. So then you're reporting on what you did. Now, how does that relate to qualitative research? Oh yeah, just this remark. Again, you can check the articles that we give you, that you see how they write the research method section as a report afterwards. So they use the past tense, we did this, we did that, etc. So this is also what we expect in the end in assignment 4. Now, so of course, if you do case studies, you in assignment 2, you're still writing up your plans. So why do you think case studies is a good method to reach your research objective or answer your research questions? Do you need to explain that case studies is the suitable strategy? It could be that, for instance, there is some kind of novelty that you still need to uncover, so you need to talk to people to get this rich insight. If, of course, you want to test theory, it's less likely that you will use the case study, but you will probably use something that we will discuss next week. So we expect to see, if you do case studies, it's probably linked to exploration or theory building or theory elaboration, refining existing theory. Don't just say, I'm doing case studies, but explain which type. And we talked about single, multiple, or comparative, real-time, retrospective, etc. How will you sample the cases? Very important question. And read again about the level and the unit of analysis, because that will explain at what level these measures are being taken. Try to already tell something about your cases, but of course, later on you can talk about what the cases actually were, but here you want to say something about what type of cases you plan to look at, what data will be used, how you will analyze it, and about those threats to validity, how will you try to ensure the highest possible level of methodological quality. And then in assignment 4, you're looking back. So the main challenge is then to summarize and condense the rich case data, and at the same time transparent and convincing. You can imagine that being transparent and convincing, you will use many words, but at the same time, you also want to summarize and condense. So it's a bit of a tension between using many words versus less words. It's inevitable that you have to talk about this within the group. So if you have a single case study, you can use all your words on describing that single case. There we also would expect a lot of richness and a complete story. If it's a multiple case, then you need to have short within case presentations. So each case quickly discussed and what is specific about each of the cases. But you're doing a multiple case study because you also want to do something across cases. So you have a within case presentation and a cross case analysis. Probably that's what it's all for, to compare maybe larger versus smaller firms, or firms that have automated a lot versus firms that have not yet done it. Typically, in a comparative case study, you want to compare something. Now, report how data was actually used. That could be different from assignment 2, because now we're looking back. And if you read our examples, you might see the within-case analysis as the findings and the cross-case analysis in the discussion. And here's an important note. Discussion is Bachelor Project Assignment 5. So in this specific example for the Bachelor Project, present your findings in Assignment 4, but leave the reflection for Assignment 5. So you cannot always literally follow what academic papers are doing. Yeah. So present both within and cross case in your BP report, which is assignment 4. And of course, indeed, you need to make good decisions about what you present where so that you don't start repeating yourself. Now, a lot of people think that qualitative research means text, text, text. I would say, no, please don't just give us only text. Be sure to also use figures and tables, because those are very helpful, not only visually to break the text and to make it more appealing, but especially in a cross-case analysis, it makes a lot of sense to have a nice table with the cases next to each other and a couple of dimensions on which you compare the cases. So figures and tables is not only pleasing to the eye, but also very important for presenting your findings in a convincing way. And you can again go back to the example papers to see how other people do it. More or less the same thing for interviews. So again, assignment 2, your planning of those. So what do you plan to do? What types of interviews? How will you sample your respondents? How will you analyze the data? How will you deal with threats to validity? And in assignment 4, it's about reporting on what you have done. Interviews lead to quotes. And we talked about this already before, literal quotes. They support your findings. So your findings are presented in your text, but in order to make it convincing, at certain points, it's very nice to insert literal quotations because they show the reader that you're not just making it up, you're building your story based on what interviewees have actually said. So what you see quite often is that they're in between the text, so you have your own written text and then it's interrupted with a supporting quote and then the text goes on. But it could also be that, like Abushaika et al. Did, and Anna showed you the table earlier on, you might also put a set of quotations in a table, and Abushaika et al. Do it to show you the relationships between first order, second order, and third order coding. Typically, you do not mention the names of people. You would mention their function. You would typically also not mention the names of organizations, but give them a pseudonym like Alpha, Beta, or you can be more creative in how to name them. Individuals and companies would typically prefer not to be mentioned by name, so make sure that you honor that confidentiality. Of course, you tell us how many people you actually interviewed, and you might have like a text here as an example from Sylvia Reedus and Van der Valk, and quite often you would also have a table explaining we interviewed 8 supervisors, 10 frontline workers, and 2 managers. Those are also types of information that you might put in a table. Some detailed information can be put in an appendix, like the interview guide, the topic list, or interview protocol. And we don't expect the literal transcripts to be part of the assignment. It's of course good to keep them at least until all the way at the end of the bachelor project, because your supervisor might say, can you show me the transcript from which you got this literal quote? So make sure that you keep them until the end of the bachelor project, but you don't need to put them in the report. And of course, interviews can be a data collection method in the case study, so you need this list as well. A quick recap. So today was about identifying a suitable approach from the variety of research strategies. So you should now be able, not necessarily now at 12:38, but after reviewing these slides once again, you should be able to explain when do I use case studies, when do I use interviews. Can I also explain what qualitative data analysis is about? This is a checklist for you. After reviewing the slides once again, you should be able to have answers to these questions. Then next week, we talk about quantitative research. again within quotation marks, because we talk about research strategies that typically use quantitative data. For instance, secondary analysis doesn't have to be necessarily quantitative, but we will discuss it as part of that lecture. Design studies as in terms of decision science, experiments, surveys. These are research strategies and research approaches that typically use quantitative data. So next week will be a lot about numbers. Now, in the final 6 minutes, we had a little bit of a leftover of last week. Oh yeah, maybe I should highlight again. Please prepare the reading. So next week, you will get example article number 4, which is quantitative paper. Then you have seen all 4 of the example academic articles that we use in this course. Again, for these example articles, it's the method sections that are important, not the content. So there will be the 4th one coming up next week. And of course, the quiz will be opened tonight or tomorrow morning and will be ready for you to take until next week, Monday.
I promised it by 5 today, the latest. So we have to do it by 5 today, the latest.
Yeah. So just a little bit of last week. Referencing is very important. Academic writing is not just about the body text, but it's also about making sure that you stand on the shoulders of giants. You build on work that has been previously done. You do that by putting references in the text, and then of course having a correct and complete reference list at the end of your work. So for each assignment that you're handing in for bachelor projects, you cannot complete it without any referencing. So we expect references in each of the bachelor project assignments. Now, within RSM, we use a style called APA from the American Psychological Association. And it's not too difficult to use it, because if you look up your sources in Google Scholar, so maybe you found them in Scopus or Web of Science, doesn't matter. If you quickly put them in Google Scholar, you will see that underneath the article as a hit, there is 2 quotation marks. If you click on it, this window, pop-up window opens, and you see that article in 5 different types of referencing. And the APA one is also there. So then afterwards, you can right-click this, you can copy this text, and then you have the reference in APA style. Just one warning, and that's a bit of a pity. Google Scholar is not always completely error-free. For instance, this should have been Academy of Management Journal with a capital M and a capital J. I don't know why Google Scholar doesn't always have it correct, but these type of small corrections you still have to make. But at least you don't have to think about where to put the brackets, etc. So just go to Google Scholar, click on Cite, this pop-up window opens, and you can select the APA style here. Very helpful. I use it all the time. You might use some software. We talked about Mendeley last week, which is software you can use to put all your references in. You can also directly use Microsoft Word. There is a citation functionality in Microsoft Word where you can manage your citations and also make sure that they appear in the correct way in your Word document. Now, sometimes you have a sentence where you need multiple citations, and then you put them in chronological order. There are other styles in which you would put the B before the E, but here we put 2007 before 2012. And if you happen to have 2 articles by these 2 authors, also both from the same year, you use a small a. If you are ever in doubt, there are websites that explain to the very minor detail how to use APA. So you can go online, ask for APA reference styling in Google, and you will find all the exact rules to follow to be fully compliant with APA. If you choose to quote something from a source, which is acceptable, it's not forbidden, make sure that you use quotation marks like you see highlighted in blue. A quotation always requires a page number. So it's not just Caldwell et al. 2009, but also the page on which you have found this quote. And sometimes you don't want literally the whole sentence. Sometimes you can leave irrelevant information out of it. So if you leave something out, square brackets with ... And sometimes, in order to make a quotation meaningful, you might have to add a word. And then you also use square brackets and you put the word that you add. So the reader will always know that the green parts were not part of the original quotation, but they were added by the author. So it is acceptable as long as you make it transparent that you have done something to the quote. And as a final check, make sure that everything that is in the reference list is also in the body text, and the other way around. All the references in the body text are mentioned in the reference list. If you use the Microsoft Word functionality, then Word will check it for you. I would always advise you to do a manual check. So do a quick check. Are the reference list and the body text the same? Now, and then the final topic, plagiarism. We've talked about it, I think, in previous courses. We just want to make sure, Anna and I, that you are aware of it again. Don't present the ideas of others as if they are your own. And that's the basic rule of avoiding plagiarism. If you use an idea of a work from someone else, put a reference to it, and if it is a literal quote, put quotation marks around it and follow the rules from the previous slide. You can do it intentionally or unintentionally. Of course, if it's intentionally, it's research misconduct. It's really something that we consider fraud. It could happen unintentionally, but even then it's a problem, because if other people see it, it really harms your credibility. So it's really something to take care of. Also check each other on this, that you're not plagiarizing other people's work. It's even baked into some of the grading rubrics in bachelor projects, but if it's repeated plagiarism, we can also report it to the exam board, and it might lead to you being excluded from the course. So make sure that you don't fall into this trap. It's not difficult to avoid plagiarism. Make sure that you use references. Already put them in your draft so you don't forget them later. If you need to directly borrow text, use quotation marks. And just avoid using text literally. Paraphrase it so that it becomes your text, and still add a reference in the end, because you're even if you're paraphrasing, you're using someone else's ideas. And I like this tip that Anna added. By paraphrasing, you also understand the text better, because you have to translate it into your own words. So make sure that you don't fall into the trap of plagiarism, because if it's really serious plagiarism, it might even lead to a report to the exam board. This is where I would like to leave it. There's no Q&A session this week, but there's going to be another one next week.